welcome to the Graceology Podcast. My name is Andrew Governale, and I am one of your co-hosts for this episode. I'm joined today by Bekah Arias, and today we're going to be continuing our discussion in the book Among Kings by Chris Jackson, which we're doing as a part of Grace Church's summer reading program for 2021. Today we're going to be discussing some more of the Among Kings content, and we were talking about it a little bit beforehand, and so I just want to give it over to you. What do you have to say about some of these things we've been reading?
Okay, so you're going to have to hold me back because this is my favorite chapter. This is everything you want in a spouse, and this is kind of my wheelhouse in my own little personal world of loving dating psychology. Anyone who knows me, good friends of mine, you know I probably spend a lot of time, way too much time, thinking about this or reading books about this or talking to friends of mine about this. I also love talking with people about their marriages and, how is that going and what's the secret to making a good marriage. I once found a Time article. It was a Time magazine, like an actual physical magazine that was talking about the science of what makes marriages work. And I had found this article online, and I actually really wanted to find it in person. But how do you find an out of copy print of something, like an actual physical magazine? And I found it at the San Dimas Library on sale for 50 cents or something.
That's awesome.
I was so excited. I nerded out. I totally nerd out on all these things. So, it's been kind of a little passion of mine for a while. I guess you could say it had an early start. It started probably back in the 90s. So at one point, Joshua Harris wrote a book called I Kiss Dating Goodbye. And I just want to say from the front that Joshua Harris has since asked for the book to not be printed because he realized there were some problems with it. And I've never had so much respect for someone as I do for someone who says, you know what, those ideas and those convictions that I felt really strongly and I really held those dear to me, I'm not in that same place anymore.
Right.
Like I've grown to a new place. To me, like being able to come clean about that and say, I want to have a conversation. And if I've hurt you, I want to know how, and I want to, do what I can to try to make amends. That's huge.
Yeah.
Like there was even someone in Grace Church that I won't call out by name, but that said something after the birth of Zoe and said, yeah, as a young father, I was just kind of overwhelmed, and sometimes I would run off and escape, and I didn't help my wife enough. And he said, but I came to a point where I realized what I was doing, and I became much more involved in my kids' lives. And, by the time we had the second or third, I was just loving it. And I just kind of realized, as a side note, how much more respect I have for people who can come back and say, I was wrong about this, and I was very public about this opinion of mine, and I just want to come back and kind of reconsider this. I mean, that's huge, and I feel like maybe that might be happening for some people, even with some of the arguments and discussions we've had recently, but it's hard to kind of recant and come back and do that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I think we're a prideful people, and I think that is just, it's so evident in so much of what we think about. When we're coming at these issues, we're thinking about
marriage and dating, and kind of most importantly, how you want to choose that person, because that does end up being one of the most important choices. Like if you want to talk about one of the choices that is most going to affect your future happiness, that's what it's going to be.
Yeah. And we want to be able to think about things. We want to be able to correct whatever our mistakes may have been, in terms of we're not always going to get it right. Everything's not always going to be according to our plans. They're going to be according to God's plan. We want to stick to that. But I'm with you on that.
It's a hard thing. And, I just kind of want to put it out there that I've come to this point in my own life. And when I see people do this publicly, I just have so much more respect for them, I guess, for the humility that it requires to do something like that. So all of that aside, I'm not turning this into a Joshua Harris bashing session.
No.
I promise.
I think clearly the opposite.
Yeah, he did. He wrote this book, and it was at the height of the purity movement. Um, he was young and I think pretty new into dating himself and very much wanting to do it the right way and to do it the godly way. And some of the ideas in that book kind of just went a little bit too extreme.
Yeah.
And there was kind of a word picture at the very beginning of that book. This is literally the opening chapter that talked about when you get married and when you walk up to the altar, you will see, instead of just bridesmaids or groomsmen, kind of a line of all the people that you've previously, given your heart to,
Yeah.
people that you've been dating previously,
Wow.
and that they're all kind of there. And it almost gave you a sense of when you come up to the altar with a dating history, you only have this minuscule little piece of your heart left to give.
Right.
Nothing could be further
Not
than the
true.
truth.
Not true at all.
That's not how life works. That's not how dating works. That's not how purity works. I mean, you don't become less and less of a person because of people that you've dated or even people that you've had an intimate relationship with. That doesn't lessen you as a person. Obviously, we all believe that there is forgiveness and that there is healing and that God covers, a multitude of sins, all sins, and that he renews everything. And
Yeah.
I think for a while there was just a little bit of an imbalance in the church in holding those two positions, and that the tension of making sure that we were holding on to forgiveness and all of its tenets, and the fact that we all need forgiveness
Yeah.
for everything. For a while, that just wasn't being held in as higher regard. It felt like purity was a little bit more being held in high regard, but in a very narrow definition, a very narrow physical sense of definition of what it was. And in a way, it almost got idolized.
Right.
So at that time, it kind of became, it didn't really matter how you treated anyone that you dated as long as you didn't sleep with them. And
Yeah.
when you kind of step back and you get some perspective from that, it's kind of like, that's crazy,
It's almost antithetical to the message of, well, it is antithetical to the message of the church.
Yeah. And I mean,
The antithetical to the message of Jesus, frankly.
yeah,
Yeah.
because I feel like when he says we sum up, the law and the prophets into just these two, love God and love your neighbor, obviously we love God, but right underneath that, how you treat people is like the message. I mean,
Right.
and it's what people remember about you. So, so in a way, this got a little bit, I would say, messed up, confused, and a little bit imbalanced in my generation.
A
And it's
legalistic approach.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
It was. It was a little bit legalistic. That's a good term for it. I tend to always just think it's extreme, but I think that's really what it
Yeah.
was, is we were trying very much to like,
Well, I think it was extreme to the extent that here you guys are dealing with these issues, and they're not easy issues for young people to deal with, and you're being told this is the way to do it. That you're going to hell if you don't do it this way, or even if you don't go to hell, you're going to live with a guilty conscience for the rest of your life. But that's not how God works. It's not that you're going to revel and be so glad that you committed those actions. Obviously you
Yeah.
didn't wind up marrying, everybody who you ever dated. But it's like, and I'm not talking about you personally, I'm talking about, just whoever's listening.
yeah.
But that's the truth of it. And it's like, we can't be legalistic,
Yeah. Yeah, so it started some very weird dating trends, I felt like. So
Okay.
this is something, this is literally my real life experience. If you know me well, you may already know this story. So here we go again. But there started to be some trends in youth groups where people would say, God has called me to stop dating for a year.
I've heard that.
Yeah, okay. So maybe this reached a little bit further than just my youth group then. So we started getting this message. This was mostly the guys telling the girls, God has called me to stop dating for a year.
Okay.
And then his best friend would say to the girl he was dating, God has called me to stop dating for a year.
Oh.
And I'm like, well, God isn't like trendy like that. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think, obviously he could be, but I think most of the time, if he calls you to something and it's really truly from him, he doesn't also call your best friend 2 weeks later when you
Right.
told them, and then your other friend. And it was one of those things where I, as a person who was kind of on the receiving end of this message, I actually wanted to test, was this from God? Like,
Yeah.
I actually wanted to
Yeah.
know. Because, I mean, if it is actually from God and that's what he's called you to, by all means,
Of
like,
course.
I want to respect that and I want to give you your space and all that kind of stuff. But every single person who made this vow broke it.
Mm.
And so I kind of felt like they were using it to get out of the relationships they were currently in, give it some time. Seriously,
Yeah.
and then get into
Not thinking that was a message from God. Maybe, but probably not.
but probably not.
And maybe it started with somebody legitimately getting the message from God that way, but like you said, trends and among young
Yeah.
people who think, "Oh, that sounds like a good idea," or, even more maybe sinisterly, "Oh, and I can use that as an excuse to get away and,
Yeah.
restart."
Yeah. So this ended up happening, and at the time I'd kind of already seen, there was a guy that I was dating, and I had kind of already seen this trend happening with his friends. And
Mhm.
then he said, I went away to camp and I fell in love. And I was just like, oh, I just want you to end this sentence with guitar playing
Yeah.
or the
Yeah.
ocean or something like that. I know that he thought he was, setting me up to say I fell in love with Alicia or Nicole or some
Right.
woman's name. But I was like, I just am very worried about how you're going to end this sentence. And he said, I fell in love with God. And so we have to stop dating. And it was like this. Thank you for laughing.
Yeah.
But I was just like, really? Because I mean, yes, you do want to love God with all your heart. You want to have your time with him. I am so happy if you went away to camp and you felt his presence and you had a brand new revelation of some sort about your life. But these kinds of things just kind of got very awkwardly joined together. Like, I love God, so I can't love you,
Yeah.
or my relationship with God makes it so that I can't have this relationship with you. And again, I'm all about people being really authentic, and so no one misunderstand. I'm not saying that your relationship with God means you can, have all things or be in relationship with everybody. Obviously, we make
Right. Of
commitments,
course.
limit freedom, all of that kind of stuff. But the way that it was said to me as a high schooler was, if I am going to be a good Christian man, I'm pushing you away
Mhm.
and then breaking it 2 months later with another girl. It just kind of poisoned that
Yeah.
message a
Yeah.
bit for me.
I don't know that God is in the business of breaking up relationships. Hey, he can be. He's broken up
Sure.
relationships, but that doesn't mean to be pure, and that's the word of the day, right? Purity. To be pure, you have to not be dating. I mean, it's like you don't have
Right.
to.
Or just courting or
Mhm.
whatever you want to call
Mhm.
it. Yeah, I
And
don't know.
if that is you, I'm not saying that's invalid. You can take a break. You can, whatever God is calling you to do, but it's not, again, in a legalistic sense.
Hmm.
If that's something that you feel like you need to do, you know, hopefully you're not in a relationship if that's what God's calling you to at the moment, but you know, that's between you and God,
Yeah.
and it shouldn't be a trend. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I
well,
agree.
and if you're gonna break up with someone for your own purposes and your own decision, just own your
Yeah.
decision.
Absolutely.
This is what I'm doing, not this is what God's making me do.
Yeah.
Just own. God gave you free will and God gave you that choice.
Mhm.
So say this is what I'm doing and this is why I'm doing it. And again, I'll have so much more respect for someone who kind of approached me
Right.
that way and you just go, well,
Yeah.
it doesn't always work out, so anyway, there's that kind of thing that happened that I just got a little bit disillusioned by. But I will say, on a side note, I got married before online dating was really a thing.
Oh,
So I I can't speak much to what that has done to the dating world. But I did
I
tell.
only know the horror stories. That's about it.
I mean, the horror stories are the most entertaining, right?
They're the only ones. They're the only ones worth being told at most points. I like the success stories, but you don't hear them as often.
You do hear them on the advertising. They
Yeah.
will use
Yeah.
these success.
Yeah. They milk
10
those for
years
all they're worth.
married and a couple kids or whatever. Yeah. So I will say I do kind of have this like curiosity that isn't very often fed, that I want to know what the online dating world is like, just from a curiosity perspective of all of my nerding out on dating psychology.
Right.
Like, what do you put in your profile so that people like click on you
Yeah.
or whatever?
Yeah.
Or what don't you say? Or what, is there words that mean different things? I don't know. So
Thankfully, there are YouTube videos out there now, so you can find out.
Are there? Oh, goodness.
Oh yeah, there's a.
Andrew
if you
sent me
can
down a YouTube rabbit hole.
if you can think of it, there's probably YouTube videos about it. So there you go.
That's true. That's true. This knowledge is out there. I was going to say, and I have told friends of mine on this, no one has ever taken me up on this offer. But if you wanted me to be your dating coach and look over your shoulder at the online options and see what's out there and tell you what I think you should put in your profile, like, just let me know. I have offered this. I have
Email
never
is in
had,
the show notes.
I've never had
It's not.
anyone take me up on it, because I'm sure they're just like, you're crazy and why you want to be that far up in my business. I don't. I'm just morbidly curious about what the online dating world is like, so.
I totally get it. Yeah.
So anyway, so there's that for what it's
But anyway,
worth.
yeah, we digress.
I know, I do. I digress. I want to get to the list. So this is something that Pastor Chris talked about in chapter 16, about the list of what you want in your spouse. Now, I will say it can be a little bit dangerous, depending maybe on personality and how much of a perfectionist you are, to make said list. Because if you're making a list and that list is growing, and if you put all of the criteria in Google and it gave you 0 results, like, your list is too long.
Yeah.
So there is kind of a point at which you can just think, and you kind of have almost an infinite amount of things that you could want in a spouse. Why not list every single one? But, you're not looking for perfection, just as you yourself are not perfect.
We don't even really understand what perfect is.
Yeah.
When you see somebody on the street, you didn't know what they were like before, but you might think, well, there might be an interesting person. You have no idea. But suddenly you're interested just because of why.
Usually the way they look, the way they carry themselves, their
that would be why.
confidence, that kind of thing. Yeah. But sometimes that same person, you can sit down and have a conversation with them and you're like, whoa, you are not who I pictured you to be in this little narrative that I've created in my head.
And so we
from just seeing you.
We create who we think is perfect, but that might not be what God has in store for us at all. And by the way, what he has in store for you isn't perfect either, but it's going to work for you. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I always feel like if I had one piece of advice of what being with the right person feels like, I would say, once you're kind of established in dating, it feels almost too comfortable.
Yeah.
Like, you feel so at home with this person that you're like, yeah, I do think I could build a home with this person and be with them for years and hopefully raise a family with them and all this kind of stuff, because I just feel so comfortable. Am I supposed to feel this comfortable? Is it supposed to be this easy? Like,
Right.
I think that, because sometimes I think people hit that point and then they go, but I love the newness of dating and I love the butterflies and I love all these other kinds of things, and they are exciting and the newness is
They love the honeymoon
wonderful.
phase.
Yeah, that honeymoon phase. But even in dating, you have your honeymoon phase and then you quickly can get into a groove, of how the two of you, how your dynamic works together. And for me, I felt like that phase felt comfortable. Well, I'll just speak with my husband, John. That phase felt comfortable faster than I expected it to.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like, oh, okay. But I've come to realize, and I try to tell other people, if they'll listen, that's a good thing. That comfortability is definitely a good thing. So it's good to make it to that point. So the way that Chris talks about it in the chapter is he says you write out this list and then you hand it over to the preacher, and it gets put in their care and holding for them to pray over and hold for you. And I will say, if you're going to write the list, that is the way to do it, because you don't want to laminate it or
No,
make
no.
it your make it your background on your phone.
Your own personal 10 commandments.
Yes. Or like look at someone and look at your phone and you're like, gosh, he's missing number 7 and he's only got half of number 8.
No.
So points lost, like you can make this dream list and then you absolutely should hand it over to someone else to let them
Well, something I did is I wrote one and, I haven't looked at it really since. But I pray over. I'm like, you know what I wrote, and you even know even better than what I wrote what I meant.
Right.
And so bring me what you want me to have. So that's what I've done, and I know that God will honor those prayers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and there's a really sweet moment in the book where if your pastor is the one who marries you, and years ago you gave him this list, he can kind of open it up, which I thought, oh, that must be really cool to have that moment in a marriage. Whether or not, you described, I mean, maybe John said, I'm really looking for a punctual wife. I mean, he would, that would be a little bit of humorous moment in the marriage ceremony right there. Sorry, baby.
Still working on that one.
Still working on that one.
None of us are perfect.
Better in the afternoon than the morning. But, it's like, I think it could be really sweet in that context as long as you kind of hand it over and then trust and don't get legalistic with your list.
Yes.
Because it can be so much fun, and especially in this day and age where we can literally order almost anything.
Yeah.
And you can start looking at like product descriptions and be like, well, I want this, gaming keyboard, but I want it to be like this, and I want it to light up, and I want look at me try to talk about gaming keyboards like I have any idea what I'm talking about.
I've done that with cell phones. I'm looking at cell phones that aren't smart. So what they call them is dumb phones.
They do.
And
they literally do.
They literally
That's
are.
Not a joke.
They literally are.
Yeah.
And they, how do you find the phone you want? You base it on the features.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So,
absolutely.
And it's almost funny that you brought up online dating earlier, because I almost feel like that's what that is too. They don't fit that.
Yeah. Well, and I think there is a little bit of a recognition that people have almost become a bit objectified in a different way and productized. Maybe that's a better word for it, to be like, oh my gosh, if all of a sudden on a sheet of paper, this person isn't who I thought they were, you won't even meet them. Mm-hmm. Whereas there's so many more unspoken things, and
you have no idea what that person is really like.
You really don't. I mean, you don't even know if they were being honest in their profile. You don't even know. It
couldn't even be a picture of them.
I was gonna say you could be getting catfished or whatever the word is. Like that's not even a picture of them.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and you would have to meet the person, sit down, have a cup of coffee, and get a vibe for who they are, and then even more than that, start dating them over a long period of time. Like, see them when they're really happy. See them when they didn't get the job. They went to the interview and they didn't get the job. See them over the holidays. See them when all of a sudden all their family's around and everything's really busy. And see if they're gracious when they're tired, or, all these other things. I mean, the amount of time it takes to really get to know a person cannot be synthesized into a profile or a description or anything, know?
I feel bad. I can't attribute this statistic to anything in particular, but I was speaking with a friend a while ago, and they had told me, again, I'll verify this and put it in the show notes, but they had told me that the average person can really only retain about 50 people in their, thinking about, hey, how are they doing? And, I should reach out to them. And when I thought about that, I thought, geez, we live in a world where people are followed, on social media by 300 people. Yeah. Or and that's a conservative estimate for a lot of people.
More if you're an influencer.
Absolutely. And, and it leads to celebrity culture. It leads to, the objectifying even, I can't tell you the amount of girls who I know personally, and guys, these people who have, close to 1,000 followers. And these are people who maybe they met once, maybe they never have met, but just because they have an attractive profile.
Yeah.
they're being followed. They don't know who those people are.
No, you don't. It takes so much time and investment. And that's probably where that 50 people statistic comes from, is
Yeah.
because of the amount of time and energy and concentration it takes to actually like get to know someone well in and out, it's just not possible with
Yeah.
all the other things that you have going on in life. I mean, probably a lot of those 50 people that you know well, those spots are already taken, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Well,
seats
and how many of
taken.
us come from massive families or, it's
Exactly.
like, and I personally don't, but I know a lot of people who do. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, you got space for maybe 2 friends, it's like, yeah, how do you balance that? So, and we're not going to be legalistic about numbers, but I'm saying it to prove the point. Like, we are inundated and we're not living the way relationally that we probably ought to be,
Yeah.
especially as Christians. And what you're
Yeah.
talking about is it takes so much time to get to know somebody, and it does. And that's how Jesus was with people. That's what Jesus did with people.
Hmm.
He was ministering, he was in relationship. He had his close people, his family and then the 12 disciples.
And that's long-term
Yeah.
friendship, relationship,
Yeah. Well, and Jesus only was alive for some close to 33 years, I think it was.
There was a moment at which I was like, I've been on this earth longer than Jesus has. And I was like, gosh, I feel like I should have done more by now.
Yeah,
I should
yeah.
have changed the world a lot more, because I did. I had a moment. I'm serious. Like,
Yeah.
you should think of this when you get to this moment in your life when you're like, I have lived longer than Jesus. Like, I've hit my 34th or 35th birthday.
Yeah. Well, it's okay. You
It's
didn't have to do as
crazy.
much as he did because he was, perfect and the savior of mankind.
That's
So that's
true.
okay.
It's a high bar. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We are to strive for that bar, but we're not going to hit that. That's why he came.
Oh man.
But again, yeah, no, that's how we're supposed to be in relationship with people. We're supposed to be giving them our time and caring. And we shouldn't all be in the same relationships with the same people. That's why we can sustain a planet of however many billion people are on this planet, is everybody has their own circle.
Yes. Their
and
own
they're-
little tribe.
Yeah,
That's kind of how we
absolutely.
are. We're tribal people, we function best in small groups. And I mean that in like just an actual sense of smaller groups, like not necessarily in the church sense of it,
Right.
but that is where the church concept of that came from, is because they realized, connecting with people on a large scale when we're all sitting in a congregation together and we have limited time, maybe, isn't realistic,
Yeah.
much more
Yeah.
doable on a small scale. So, yeah, it's crazy. I know they did one study. I think this is coming from another podcast that could be a podcast or an article, but they, instead of doing an online profile, here's the picture of the person, because really picture is like what, 99% of it. Instead of doing that, they just had people like moving like little bots in a chat room. And they said, you can go talk to people, but you're
Yeah.
not going to see a picture of them and you're not going to
Oh,
read a profile. You're just going to go kind of say hi.
that's interesting. Yeah.
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 And then you're going to say, like, okay, well, I had a good conversation and a good connection that I made with this person. And this person, I really couldn't even get a conversation started with. We just struggled. It felt very unnatural.
Yeah.
And so you were kind of making them blind, because you're just like a little, I don't know. What are those little things in Among Us? I don't know. Like you're a little
I don't know. Yeah,
crew
yeah,
member
yeah,
or something. They didn't do it in Among
I'm
Us. I'm
very-
just thinking of that.
I'm a very non-hip young person. I did not play that game, but yeah, I know what you're talking about.
My daughter plays Among Us and she's like
goodness.
really good at it. And then, yeah, I don't know what these little characters are, but they have tasks to do, because I said, are they doing their work or is that their chore? And she goes, task, Mom. They're doing a task.
Well,
I
next
was
time,
like, oops.
next time she asks, what she can be doing, you say, "Well, go do your task." So there you go.
Oh my gosh.
Give them tasks. There you go.
That is a really good idea.
Parenting tip from somebody who's not a parent.
Well, that's people like to give parenting tips. No offense, Andrew.
No, of course.
Oh my gosh, that's funny. That might be a little like parenting life hack for me. I'm going to try
Yeah.
that. But then she's going to be like, no, I'm the imposter this time. And then she's going to like sabotage my chore
Oh
list.
gosh,
Okay, I'm sorry. I keep digressing.
that's okay.
But I will say, one of the things that I like is I feel like it's kind of the obvious, like almost the elephant in the room when people are talking about their dating list.
Mm-hmm.
And Chris does bring this up is, are you that person? You
Mm.
know, because it's again, it's very easy. And if you're thinking of yourself more as a consumer,
Yeah.
that's kind of productize this person on a computer screen and decide this is what I want. Well, as just a actual consumer, it doesn't matter who you are as long as you have money,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But relationships, obviously, not transactional in that way.
No.
It's a completely different thing. So I think as we all become more and more online consumers and online customers, that we make that mental break in
Yeah.
between when we're looking at, an actual object and it doesn't matter who we are, to when we are actually looking to, possibly date someone and have them be part of our lives and have this be a huge, huge shift in terms of this is going to determine kind of the direction of the rest of your life. Very much need to get off the chair, get out from behind the screen.
Yeah.
You are an active part of this process. So Chris asks in here, if you want someone godly, are you godly?
Mm-hmm.
If you want someone who is active and who is, involved in their community, are you active in those things? Are there
Yeah.
causes that are close to your heart? I mean, again, the more that you kind of step into who you are and put a little bit more of your focus on that,
Yeah.
of course, the more likely you are to meet like-minded people. So, which kind of goes back. There was a good quote at the beginning that says, if you're running towards Jesus and you see someone else running next to you towards Jesus, take a second look at those people.
Yeah.
So, which is, it's kind of a cool idea.
I love that analogy. Yeah.
I do too. Yeah. And I've heard it before where it's kind of like, if you are both moving toward God, you are also moving closer to each other.
Yeah.
It's almost like,
The
God
Apostle
being
Paul, I think, mentioned that too. He was like, you want to be like Jesus, but, you can look at people like me and the other apostles and, other godly people, and that's, how we're supposed to live, And he was furthering the message of the gospel. That's what he spent his entire life doing after, the road to Damascus. So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, kind of the follow me as I follow Jesus.
Yes.
But I felt like he was careful to say, but make sure you continue to keep your eyes on Jesus, because he didn't want anyone to
Right.
idolize
and
him.
that could become idolization, yeah. You
Yeah.
really want to keep away from that.
Yeah. So I think kind of when you're side by side, both looking in the same direction, like that's kind of ideally, that's kind of the picture at the beginning of what you want. But I mean, I will say there is sometimes a tendency for people to be thinking a whole lot more about what you want someone else to be rather than are you being the right type of person for them. And it's hard. Like we all have like our own work, our own like, I don't know, bad habits. Probably all of us have destructive habits to some extent. Probably everyone has their own self-destructive habit to some extent,
Absolutely.
So it takes a while for you to kind of like do your work on yourself, become aware of those, break habits sometimes that have been learned over years. And there may be some habits where it's like, this one is particularly tough for me. Or there might be some ways where, you don't want to rest in that's just how I am, but you do kind of
Right.
want to own if this is an area that is always going to be hard for you, just be aware of that too, and kind of have some extra sensitivity around that. But, do the work in your life where you can.
Yeah.
And kind of, look for someone who can kind of be a little bit of that. I like to say someone who can kind of carry the weight where you're weak, someone whose strengths complement your weaknesses. I feel like not some relationships, some marriages are probably more like opposites attract marriages, like ours in a lot of ways, personality wise, are opposite, value wise, I would say are more the same. Probably some people are more in a similar personality marriage, but I don't know as much about those because I have limited experience. But I will say kind of the beauty of the opposite ones is it does give you a chance to shine where you naturally shine
Right.
and to back off if there's, an area that you don't feel as comfortable in. And then you don't compete with each other because you're
Yeah.
complementary with each other.
Yeah. And you can, I'm sure, grow quite a bit from, having somebody who's not exactly the same as you.
That is true. I am wearing John down year by year. Year by year as we're married. If he's listening to this right now, he's going to be shaking his head. We joke about it. But in all seriousness, I think that I have shown and brought out some neat sides of him and vice versa, because we have gotten to see up close what someone with kind of an opposite skill set is like and
Yeah.
how they do those things. And I'm hoping that it has kind of brought both of us to being closer together, kind of almost on a personality scale, less farther apart with like rough edges, and a little bit more like balanced as people. Like,
Yeah.
hopefully that's the goal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I like the whole concept of, making sure that you aren't the only person who's looking for, okay, well, I have to have this in my life, because somebody else is thinking that right now, and they might be the person for you, but you're not putting any effort into yourself. And that's not a pride thing. That's not an ego thing. I wanted to be clear about that, because it could turn into that,
Yeah.
and you want to be clear with the fact, no, this is about making yourself the best person you can be for the people around you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely not for, I mean, it's going to benefit you, but
Sure.
it's of a selfless mindset.
Yeah.
Definitely.
That's a good point. I didn't think about that. It could go that direction.
Yeah.
But
It was just something that came to my mind.
yeah, well, and it's I promise I won't camp out here, but I know some people have said this about the Enneagram, like, oh, it's self-centered. You're thinking about yourself all the time. You're thinking about,
Right.
doing your own work and whatever. But a lot of it is when you're doing your own self-work, either through therapy or through the Enneagram or just however you choose to do it, you are really kind of trying to become a better version of who God really made you to be, so that you can use those gifts and you can be reaching out to people.
Absolutely.
So if you're one of those people who has multiple perspectives, maybe you can use that to help mediate for people who can't, or if you're, someone who wants justice for people, or who, wants to kind of pick up the banner for people who are poor or can't speak up for themselves or are marginalized in some way, then that's who God created you to be, and you're doing your self-work so that you can do a better job at all of those things. So
Yeah. I want to end, I want to end with the way that a podcaster who I started listening to, actually a pastor, two pastors, the podcast is called Let's Talk Purity, and the guy who said this is Richard De La Mora. And he said, if you don't like what you're attracting, then take a look at what you're promoting. And I think that that's something that we could really take away from this. We could really sort of evaluate ourselves and see, just are we coming at our lives from the right place, from the right perspective? Are we coming at it from the lens of grace and God and, where we feel we're being led in our lives? Are we in His Word? Are we studying? And not that that's, the be all end all. If you're completely new to this, you just, be in relationship, and that's what it comes down to. Live in the community, and you'll grow into that. But
you start somewhere and don't take on too much at once
no,
overwhelm yourself.
It's a journey, believe me.
Yeah.
I speak this way because I've been on this journey for a long time. But if you're new to this, then don't be overwhelmed at all. It will come to you.
Yeah.
But so I think that's where we want to leave it for now. And I would like to close with the reading from Numbers 6, chapter 6, verse 22 through 27. And this is the priestly blessing. The Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron and his sons, this is how you are to bless my people. Say to them, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn His face toward you and give you peace. And so they will put my name on my people, and I will bless them. And we do declare this in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen."
Amen.